It's a trucking, transportation, and lifestyle show like none other.
Man, you call this a life?
Road Gang Radio is back for another half hour of the best transpo show in the known universe.
We come in peace. Well, actually, we're falling to pieces.
Let's see if we can achieve liftoff, Phone Master Dre.
We sure did, and we're lifting off from NOLA to Nashville to your cab. This is Road Gang Radio with Lindsay, Lawler, Jimmy Mack.
I'm going to have a ton of questions for our next guest. I'm not going to get any of them in because our next guest is a Willie Nelson specialist, which means Lindsay Lawler is now over the moon. Before we get to any of that, though, by the way, when it comes to roadway safety, the iron is hot, and OOIDA isn't waiting for anyone else to strike it. With all the focus on English language proficiency measures and non-domiciled CDL rules, the association now calls upon Congress to use that momentum to enhance driver training, licensing, and qualification standards. After all, the issues all go hand in hand, as Colin Long, OOIDA's Director of Government Affairs, makes the case, as he did on this show. Plus, there's a lot of great trucking-centric channels on the tube of you. Trucking Made Successful is one of them. If you've ever watched it, you know Miranda, who helps people make sound business decisions based on current conditions in the market. But it wasn't that long ago that Miranda was teaching herself. In fact, like all good students of trucking, she still is, and that's why her content resonates with so many. 129,000 subscribers and 11.3 million views. That is Scott and Ashley, our good friends on Trucking with Oida, immediately after Road Gang Radio here on the Radio Nemo platform. Good morning to you, Lindsay Lawler.
Good morning, friends. So excited about this show, always. So excited about this next conversation. We've been getting having some really cool music journalists on the show, Jim, doing deep dives into not only just artists, but events and history, books, so many different things, but the music that has shaped our life and our times. So this one is probably one of the most, the book we're diving into today hits one of the most iconic artists of all times across all genres, and certainly a big part of my life, certainly a big part of Music City here, where I live in Nashville. And Geoffrey Himes, who's joining us, he's someone whose writing has shaped the way many of us really think about music, whether you know it or not. You've probably seen some of this man's work. For nearly 5 decades, Geoffrey's been writing weekly about music for the Washington Post, magazines like Rolling Stone, New York Times, the Nashville Scene, and so many more. His new book, Willie Nelson, all the albums, the stories behind the music. It's a remarkable, guys. It's a chronicle of Willie's astonishing 70-year recording career, which is just mind-blowing. 152 solo and collaborative albums from 1954 to 2025, mapped out album by album with context and stories and chart data and, well, heart, because the heart is all Willie, of course. And this book really mixes the logistics with the legacy. I think it's a cool balance of it. And I say it's special because for me personally, I've got so many of these records in my collection. I've sung Always on My Mind to my daughter every night since she was born. And Willie is the soundtrack of so many nights on the road for both myself, for our drivers. So this is going to be a fun conversation with a man who really knows what he's talking about more than anybody except for maybe Willie. Please make welcome to the show, Geoffrey Himes. Glad to have you.
I'm glad to be here.
Geoffrey, I just want to kind of start off with one of the kind of core principles of the book. This is not so much a biography as it is a look at an artist through the soul of his works. And you could make a case that Nelson, like Johnny Cash, like Nina Simone, like Sam Cooke, has a voice that is so distinctive that it ends up inhabiting songs in a way that very few others can do. And the term that I always feel like when I hear a Willie Nelson song is relief, but it's hard-won relief. It feels like a man who has come out the other side dirty but intact. And I wanted you to kind of start off by just talking about how his voice matches up with the lyrics often that are his, even when there's somebody else's, that he's able to kind of make a song uniquely his own, and the kind of merger of form and content, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's one of the things I sort of track through the book is that I think one of the hardest tricks to pull off in popular music is to sound like you're in real pain and sorrow, but also to maintain a sense of dignity at the same time. And, sometimes, people wallow in their pain and sort of lose sort of self-respect, or, they're so, macho or whatever that you don't really feel the pain at all. But Willie lets you see both sides of that equation in sort of song after song after song, whether it's a song he wrote or a song he picked. It's a way of, I think, demonstrating for all of us how when you have losses in your life, whether it's romantic or somebody dies or your career goes sideways or whatever, is that, you need to sort of acknowledge that it hurts and that, it's definitely a setback, but you can, still carry yourself with pride and move forward.
Well, I love that was, as a songwriter myself, I love how you just put that about, because we always think about why are we drawn to these kind of the sad songs and the old country when they just said such hard things, but you felt seen. You didn't feel necessarily heavy when you listened to him, like it. And Willie's one of the greats that has a way of saying something so deep and heavy, but delivering it so conversational and so beautiful. Will you just dive into that a little more? Just why, I guess, how it from the listener standpoint, you as a listener, anyone else listening, is there a method you think actually to Willie's madness, or is that just Willie being Willie?
Yeah, no, I think there is a method to his madness. I think that there's, people always remark on Willie's unusual phrasing. So he's not always on the beat, sort of slipping and sliding around the beat, but always sort of staying in time at the same time. And I think that sort of conveys to us, the listeners, that, life is uncertain. It's not predictable. It can come at you in a lot of different ways, and yet we move forward. And in his songs, he's never predictable. He can rush a bunch of syllables, or he can drag a syllable out, but it all, comes out in the end. And that's, reinforces the lyric message I was talking about a minute ago, I think.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you guys both something. I didn't even tell this to Lindsay. I was a big Robert Redford fan, so you probably both know where I'm going next. And when Redford passed away, Lindsay, the first song that I put on was My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys, which of course is an Electric Horseman. And the thing about the way he sings this stuff is that he always feels like he is choking back a tear. And you kind of talked about it as well too, but I always feel like in his songs, even in the best of them, there is defeat but with honor. And I'm kind of curious as to at what point you feel like he's inhabiting them. It's not a trick. I mean, that's the thing, is based on what you know about him, is there a way that you feel like this is not an affectation, but I mean, does he talk in any sort of length or process about the idea of where he is emotionally when he goes into these songs? Or, like I said, is it, as Lindsay said, him just being him? I mean, there's stuff that alludes to it in the book, but what are your feelings about that?
Well, one of the times I interviewed Willie, he said that his favorite country singer is George Jones, and his favorite singer of all time is Frank Sinatra.
Perfect.
And, George is the, king of tears, as they say. And Frank has got that sort of jazz-like phrasing that I was just talking about a minute ago. And somehow Willie's able to combine those two. So you really get the tear of George Jones, but you also get that sort of, jaunty, I'm on top of the world, sort of, moving around thing of Frank Sinatra. And I think that because Willie grew up in a small East Texas town, when he opens his mouth, he's going to sound country. No matter, he loves a lot of different kinds of music. He loves, jazz. He loves blues. He loves gospel. He, loves sort of early rock and roll. But when he, sings, he sounds country. And so that, resonates with listeners who like country music. But there's all these other flavors in the background that make him unlike any other country singer. So it's country music, but it's not like other country music that you're familiar with. It's like a recipe where you have the the basic ingredients, but if it's a really good cook, they know what spices to put in to make it different from everybody else's lasagna or whatever.
Well, and Willie, obviously, he's like you said, he's like no other, and he's been doing it longer than anyone that we really still have alive as far as the legend that he is and that kind of caliber. And Geoffrey, I read several years ago, It's a Long Story, My Life, Willie's autobiography. And the thing that I loved the most about that book is that it wasn't linear. Like, he bounces all over. Sometimes it feels a little manic when he's bouncing all over, but it felt very Willie again. So from that perspective, given that he's still recording well into his 90s, how do you see the latest albums? Because this book, as you do it is linear, going through, from the very beginning to now. But with that non-linear thing in the book going through, how do you see the latest albums connecting back to the earliest ones? Are there through lines that you found that really run from the 50s to today?
Yeah, I think that there definitely is. Some of these qualities we've been discussing are there in every phase of his career. I think he went through sort of a lull in the early aughts, the early 2000s, but then he hooked up with Buddy Cannon, who's a sort of Nashville producer who worked with Kenny Chesney and George Strait, and they formed this partnership that sort of revived Willie's career. He started writing again. He sort of invested himself in his records again. And so that all those records from around 2012 till now are, some of his best records, I think. Mm-hmm. And, in his recent records, like Last Leaf on a Tree, he's really dealing with the fact that, he's old mm-hmm. and, he's facing all the questions that come with that of mortality. And as we talked about before, facing up to them bravely, acknowledging the fears, but also acknowledging that you have to face up to them and keep going. So,
do you think that Buddy, just real quick on that note, that Buddy, who yes is a legend here in Nashville, but was a little bit, because you said you think that and I agree, some of his best records from 2012 to today with Buddy. Do you think that's because Buddy entered in as he let Willie really be Willie, as Buddy was assuredly a fan of Willie's, I'm sure, let him be Willie, but also was able to balance like the Nashville sound, to keep it current, to make it relevant while not taking any away from Willie's old school style? Is that what Buddy was able to balance?
Yeah, that's part of it. I think he made things easy for Willie. Willie would send him song ideas, and Buddy would, flesh them out, so to speak. So, mm-hmm. Make the chord changes obvious and fill in the missing pieces. And so, Willie could stay home on, near the nearest golf course, and when he was inspired, he could send something off to Buddy, and Buddy would do it. And then when they got together in Nashville or Texas, the songs were ready to go, and Willie just had to show up and sing them. And I think that, if you make things easy for Willie, he'll respond with creativity.
Yeah.
For a guy who is often, in the portrayal of him in regards to popular culture, there is who we are, and then there is who that is kind of presented, even if it's your own presentation of the self. He's always, the redheaded stranger. He's a distinctive outsider, an individual kind of out there on his own. So much of his important points of his career, whether contentious or not, have really been defined by the quality of his collaborators. And there is a certain kind of Forrest Gump aspect of kind of stumbling into this kind of thing. Do you think in many ways that he was able to kind of at the same time recognize the people who came into his life, whether he had a contentious relationship or not, based on the sound they wanted to help him create, to understand that he needed those folks in order to continue to be Willie?
Well, I think that his best work, was started in the early 70s when he was recording for Atlantic. And part of the reason is he was able to use the musicians he wanted rather than what the record company wanted him to use. And as you said, that he needed those sympathetic collaborators to make things come out the way he heard them in his head. I think is a good way to say it. There's a famous story about in his early records he used Jimmy Day, who was the legendary steel guitarist in Nashville, who was a great musician but had a drinking problem and was cantankerous. And Willie would always fire him and then take him back, fire him and take him back. And finally one day, he said he had enough. He said, but now I got a problem. How can I find a steel guitarist as good as Jimmy Day? Well, it's almost impossible. And then he stumbled across Mickey Raphael on harmonica, and he had this brainstorm that, the harmonica, which has that sort of sustained, fluid lines that like a steel guitar does, that could take the place of a steel guitar. And that's sort of an example of how he finds solutions to his problems. Let's put it that way.
He makes lemonade out of lemons. Oh, Willie Nelson.
Right.
We're talking with Geoffrey Himes right now. The new book out, which is beautiful. Willie Nelson, all the albums, the stories behind the music. You can find it wherever you get your books. Came out just earlier this month. Geoffrey, your book traces Willie's early years, so much of it as a songwriter in Nashville, and both in Nashville and Texas. And so when you look back at those early albums, what stands out to you about Willie's voice or style that hinted he would become what he is today? Because obviously we know Willie isn't, Willie points out his favorite singers, and his voice is not like those people at all. So what hints to you from the earliest albums that Willie would become Willie?
Yeah, so he first had success as a songwriter before he had success as a singer. A lot of his greatest songs were written in those, what he calls the hungry years, of like the late 50s and early 60s, when he wasn't a star of any sort, but he was writing songs that other people were having hits with. So like Hello Walls for Farrah Young, and Nightlife for Ray Price, and Crazy for Patsy Cline, Funny How Time Slips Away. So he was already writing songs of that caliber back then, early as 1959 when he was in Houston. So, that element was always there. And he had a problem because his way of singing was so idiosyncratic that session musicians had trouble following him. And if they tried to follow him, they would often get lost. And if they didn't follow him, it sort of things didn't go together. So, if you listen, there's an album that came out in RCA, which was a live album recorded at Panther Hall down in Fort Worth, Texas. And, you can hear that he was playing with his own band before a home crowd in Texas and playing a lot of the songs he was putting out in Nashville. But you could hear that he already had a vision of how he wanted those songs to sound, because you could hear it on that record, even though he was playing an electric guitar back then instead of a trigger. So I think that the vision was in his mind all along. And when I did research for the book, one of the things that surprised me is that I always thought that all those early records were, hopelessly bad or whatever. That's not true. There's a bunch of them that are really pretty good, and there are some really bad ones, but there are some really good ones. And so, it was a revelation for me, and hopefully, when people read my book, it'll be a revelation for them that some of those things are really worth going back and checking out.
I wanted to, I mentioned Redford at the beginning. I also wanted to kind of ask you a question about the public persona of Willie Nelson and the music that comes after that. Is that there is a period of time from the mid-'70s up until about the early parts of the '80s where a lot of popular singers made their way into movies because of movie stars' affection for them and getting them in films and all of that stuff. And I was kind of curious, from your own standpoint, listening to this catalog, kind of going through it, whether it's Honeysuckle Rose or Electric Horseman or later on The Red-Headed Stranger, if in fact, in the same way with Christopherson, that the movies end up shaping them and then end up shaping their public images and then affect the way they write songs in order to kind of keep on that it helps them create the myth that then becomes part of the content of the songs. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I think that Willie's persona. He wasn't an actor who went to acting school and learned the craft. He was sort of playing himself in all those movies, and so and himself, of course, existed before the movies came along. So I think it did more to spread the word to a larger audience than anything else. My favorite of all the movies is Songwriter, which was he
so
and
good.
Christopherson, sort of burned out songwriters trying to help a young woman, Leslie Ann Warren, break into the business, and all their sort of hijinks and escapades. It has some really good songs. It's a very good plot. That's my favorite. But I like The Legend Horseman. I like Barbarossa, the early ones. But I think he's not going to be remembered as an actor. He's going to be remembered as a songwriter and a singer.
My favorite, actually, one of my favorite songs of his is "The Songwriters," by the way, which is not as well known. But when I've been out on the road with a bunch of songwriters, we listen to that and feel better about our sad lives. So as you mapped out the 152 albums, first of all, is there anyone that's done more albums that's the Willie legend than Willie? Do we know of anyone that's done more than that?
I hate to say that there isn't, but because somebody will call in and say I'm
right,
wrong.
right. I'm sure there's somebody. Yeah.
But yeah, it's it's a pretty impressive thing. So when I got the assignment to do the book, and we worked out with my editor the format, I searched through all my shelves, and it turns out I already owned 120 of the albums.
Wow.
So I was well on my way to getting there.
Wow, that's amazing. So as you mapped these out, for you personally, was there an album in the middle of his career that felt any place like a turning point? And I'm sort of contradicting what I said earlier, saying that they all really have this, cohesive thing, but there is evolution and experimentation in here. So is there an album like in the middle of his career that felt like a turning point where you thought, okay, is this the new Willie?
Well, I think at the end of my book, there's an appendix, and I list all 152 albums in order of quality according to my judgment. And the number one album is Phases and Stages, which is from the early 70s on Atlantic. And I think that's a really turning point because it's really for the first time is out from under the thumb of the Nashville producers and is able to do what he wants to do. And it's a concept album like Red-Headed Stranger, which tells a story. The first half of the album is a divorce from the woman's side, the picture, and the second side of the album is the man's side of the story. It really paints a picture of their relationship, and the music is very supportive of everything he's singing and the way he sings, and that's really sort of, even though he was singing that way in live performances, it really all sort of gelled right there, I think.
Yeah, and there really is a sense, and I know that everybody's experienced this on kind of a lesser level, that when you finally get things right, there is an unwillingness of an artist once they've gotten to a place where they understand what they need to do to make things work, and they've actually had it. It's a confirmation, as it were. You know how, Lindsay, when you sometimes feel like if I could only have the following things, I know I could make this work, and then you get the following things and you make it work, you never want to give that up. And it then becomes, it's like almost like that album becomes like a baseline, doesn't it? Where it's kind of like, this is what it has to be. This is what it has to be moving forward. Might not always get here, but we're always going to fight for this kind of, that's where we need to be in order to kind of go any further. Is that the sense you get from that album?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that what's interesting about the 70s, the Atlantic records didn't actually sell that well, even though they were some of his best records. But when Red-Headed Stranger hit and it went platinum, and Wanted the Outlaws went platinum, and he had this sort of tremendous commercial clout all of a sudden. What's interesting to me is how he used it. He used it to make to explore the American Songbook, all those songs he grew up with on albums like Stardust, and he used it to duets with all the older performers who inspired him, whether it's Farron Young or Ray Price or whoever. And he saluted songwriters he really admired: Chris Christopherson, Cindy Walker, Harlan Howard, so on and so forth. So he had this great success, but rather than buy another fleet of cars, he sort of used his clout to do artistic things as well as financial rewards.
This, again, we're talking with Geoffrey Himes. The book is Willie Nelson, all the albums, the stories behind the music. Geoffrey, obviously, we will let everybody know this is a great book for a Christmas album. Real quick, is there a moment in your research, already knowing that you realized you had 120 some odd albums, what is one thing you found out about Willie that surprised you, or a song you found that you didn't even know that has now become like a baseline for you? Is there anything that stood out that sort of shocked you?
Yeah, as I said, those early records I didn't know as well as the 70s, 80s, 90s stuff. So he made some singles for RCA that never made it onto an album. There's an anti-war song that's really powerful. There's a song about a convict on a chain gang that's really powerful. Very sort of dark and folk-like, which he didn't do very often, but his singles were really powerful. So I guess that was the biggest surprise for me.
I can't thank you enough for making time for us this morning. And guys, by the way, I'm not as familiar with this catalog as Lindsay and our guest are, but I will tell you, as a big fan of Christopherson, I was so thrilled to see that you gave Willie Nelson Sings Christopherson an A+ and ranked it number 3, because it is matter of fact, it's one of those things. Poor Chris. Somebody always does Chris's songs better than Chris does, but it's right. Willie Nelson that does it. Perfect, isn't it? Great.
It's a perfect marriage of a great singer and a great songwriter. I'd like to, before we hang up, I'd like to mention one other thing. Last winter, I released a book with the Country Music Hall of Fame it's called In-Law Country, and what it is, it's about that group of artists: Emmylou Harris, Rodney Crowell, Roseanne Cash, Guy Clark, Steve Earle, Ricky Skaggs, who all sort of were a gang who played on each other's albums, wrote songs for each other, often married each other and divorced each other. And it's a really important movement in country music that's never been recognized as such, and so I gave them the name In-Law Country. So
I love that name.
Let's bring it back.
Love to have you come back and talk about that book if you'd be open to it, because we love that in between. Anytime. Sort of the music we know, but we don't really know the real deep story behind it. So please come back, and if you will, we would love to have you. Your answer is yes.
yes, I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding. Perfect. Geoffrey Himes, thanks for taking time. Willie Nelson, all the albums, the stories behind the music. Geoffrey, have the best day, and we will talk to you very soon.
Thank you, Geoffrey.
Yep, till we meet again.
Till we meet again.
It's a good book, guys. Beautiful book.